Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology forecast for March 2022. First, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. If you would like to get these forecasts early, and if you would like to get access to a lot of other material that's never made available to the public that concerns astrology, magic, and astrological magic, and at the highest tier, if you would like access to my magical elections document, which comes out once a month and gives you the best times and also instructions for making your own astrological talismans, please go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. Now, let's talk about some of the key themes that we saw in March. February ended the Saturnian season of January and much of February, when nearly all the visible planets were in one or the other of Saturn-ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. Now, as predicted, in February, the Sun conjunct Saturn aspect brought a massive winter storm in the United States in the South and the Midwest. And the Venus conjunction with Mars brought, interestingly, a couple of notable settlements. Venus and Mars, of course, have a lot to do with uniting and with overcoming obstacles to union. Prince Andrew settled with one of the women who had accused him of trafficking and abuse when she was a teenager, and the parents of the kids who were shot in the Sandy Hook mass shooting settled with the gunmaker Remington, all on the same day, just as Venus was conjoining Mars. Both of these settlements could have very important legal implications in the future. Even around this time, Russia made some noises about retreating from the Ukraine border. So there's a lot to be said about the unifying powers of Venus conjunct Mars. Now let's start with the first week of March. March 2nd, we have a new moon at 12 degrees Pisces, and it is a lovely new moon after the Saturnian lunations that we've had up till now in 2022. This new moon is ruled by Jupiter, who is in his own domicile, Pisces, and it closely conjoins the new moon by about 2 degrees. If you use Neptune, that is widely conjunct the lunation as well, and if you're using it, you could say that there is a sense of confusion or a lack of clarity about the facts that surrounds the time of the new moon. Now, Jupiter always brings the opportunity for peace, generosity, and ease. This lunation could prove helpful in providing a resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is probably the most watched conflict in the world at the moment. And remember that a lunation is effective for 2 weeks after the fact, so it provides a window of about 2 weeks to make real progress in its significations. Now notice that this chart has multiple conjunctions. Every visible planet is conjoining at least one other planet. There is a real sense that connections and new beginnings are now available if we want to step through that door. Of course, that's always a big if, but that is something to keep in mind. Now, I think that in many ways, it's a bit unfortunate that this year's Olympics couldn't have been held in March, as the lunations have a jovial feel that would have been completely different and far more positive than a games that was held during the Saturnian season in January and February that I had mentioned earlier. I think that if something is intended to be fun, holding it during a very Saturnian period astrologically usually makes the games kind of grim and frankly not very enjoyable. Usually people just kind of end up feeling terrible and questioning their life choices. March 2nd, Mercury conjoins Saturn at 19 degrees Aquarius. Now, this conjunction brings accountability for past actions, sometimes through the legal process and sometimes through more like social pressure. We reap what we sow under this combination. And it is important to note that sometimes transportation or air accidents occur, especially because Aquarius is involved here, and Aquarius is an air sign. And of course, Saturn makes things more difficult, makes things more heavy. So there is going to be some kind of, I think, important news announcement right around this March 2nd date. But also recognize that in your personal life, it's an opportunity to sort of put the line through an old chapter. And, if you have to sort of pay for something that you did in the past, well, now is the right time to do that. Now, week 1, because it's a very busy week 1 of March, continued. March 3rd, Mars and Venus conjoin Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn. Now, this happens on the same day, and Mars and Venus have actually been traveling together for some time now, and last conjoined at 16 Capricorn. They will conjoin again. So here they apply to another conjunction. They're not quite conjoined to each other yet, but both conjoined Pluto almost simultaneously. So, of course, with Venus and Mars, as I was just saying in February, we saw there's an opportunity for peace, for negotiation, calming that martial spirit of division. Now, with Pluto in the mix, this is an occasion that impacts the largest entities, the largest nations. With Pluto, think big. The giants, I would say, that stride the earth, as Marsilio Ficino called them, get together to make a deal at this time. This may or may not be a democratic decision, but rather it's something that impacts and ultimately is decided by some of the largest entities in the world. On a personal level, if you are negotiating something now, it could be that there is a major player somewhere who is putting their thumb on the scale to force a certain outcome. You may or may not be aware of this as you're going through the negotiation, but be aware that this is something that will be an extra factor in that Venus-Mars conjunction. Now, March 5th, the Sun will conjoin Jupiter at 14 degrees Pisces, and it's very interesting to note that André Barbeau, the French mundane astrologer who passed away a few years ago, conducted an extensive study on this aspect, and he found that it presented an opportunity for peace treaties, ceasefires, and armistices. He gave this conjunction a traditional orb of 12 degrees on either side, which results in almost a month-long window of opportunity for there to be some kind of peace deal whenever the Sun conjoins Jupiter. Certainly this conjunction, which would have started to be in that orb described by Barbeau around February 18th, could bring a possible détente in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, as well as any other conflict. This could, of course, work on the personal level as well, not just international affairs. Combined with the Venus-Mars-Pluto conjunction, which happens just a couple days prior, I wonder if another very powerful player gets involved in this conflict to try to calm the situation down. However, it is not entirely clear, because of the presence of Pluto and just because of the very dynamic nature of some of these aspects, whether any agreements or ceasefires that are reached now, whether they'll be lasting or whether they will be more fragile and will have to be renewed as time goes on. Again, Venus-Mars-Pluto is very dynamic, which suggests a situation that keeps evolving rather than something you can simply cross off your list because it's done for good. I think that this aspect, Sun conjunct Jupiter, is very good for making peace in your life and finding common ground in our personal lives as well. So think of it as an opportunity each year, every 13 months, to bring people together for a common purpose, setting aside negative feelings for a greater good. Now, the same day, March 5th, Mars and Venus enter Aquarius and immediately conjoin at 0 Aquarius. Now, remember that Aquarius is a very important sign for Russia historically, and even since the breakup of the USSR, it's been an important placement for the Soviet republics, the former Soviet republics, because they all have Saturn in Aquarius. So this, of course, includes Ukraine. Now, generally, Mars and Venus entering Aquarius and conjoining, again, it's good for peace, for making agreements of any kind, and it's nice that they continue to travel through Aquarius together. Venus continues to hold that door open for a peaceful and diplomatic resolution of any tensions. The other nice thing about Venus acting as a kind of chaperone to Mars as he travels through Aquarius is that she can positively impact the upcoming Mars-Saturn conjunction that will perfect in April. Venus brings a moderating influence to bear on the two malefics, Mars and Saturn. Note that Venus will be besieged between Mars and Saturn starting on March 5th, depicting a person, an entity, a nation, whatever, who is helplessly stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, Mars and Venus leaving Capricorn is also good for lowering COVID cases generally worldwide. As I've discussed in my video that I put out February 2022, it's about astrology of COVID. Whenever Capricorn is activated by a slow-moving planet, whether it's a retrograde planet or whether it's one of the outer planets, COVID cases tend to shoot up all over. Now, to have Venus and Mars leave that sign, leave Capricorn, is helpful to the areas and countries that are still struggling with high case counts. Right now, that would be East Asia that's still dealing with Omicron, whereas that's been receding in most of the rest of the world. Now, luckily, after that intense first week of March, The second week of March is actually relatively quiet. All we get on March 9th is Mercury entering Pisces. Now, Mercury in Aquarius was strongly influenced by Saturn, both by being in Saturn's sign and also by having conjoined Saturn in Aquarius. So Mercury's pass through Aquarius caused a very measured, serious discussion about everything, kind of not being afraid to look at the dark side of things. And there was a sense of making momentous choices. It's not a light placement for Mercury. Now with Mercury entering Pisces, which is the sign of his detriment and fall, the situation is more fluid, and we are willing to take things on faith, because that has a lot to do with Pisces and with Jupiter, instead of insisting on material proof. But we also have a greater mental flexibility and willingness to think outside previously accepted boundaries. So I think there's a little bit of a trade-off. It's not necessarily great for Mercury to be in Pisces, but I think after that intense 2-month period of pretty much everything being in Capricorn and Aquarius, it's nice to have a little bit of a loosening, a little bit of a sense of, let's just kind of take things on faith for a little while and stop worrying so much about all the negative things that could happen. Now, the full week 3 of March starts off with March 18th's full moon at 27 Virgo. Now, this full moon is ruled by Mercury in Pisces, conjoining and received by Jupiter. Similar to that new moon of March 2nd, this new moon brings an opportunity, again a 2-week window, for forgiveness, peace, and a constructive path forward. There could be particular good news in the following 2 weeks regarding children, education, and business, since these are all connected to Mercury. Generally, I would say this is a positive, open, communicative lunation that is a real balm to the soul. The same day, March 18th, Jupiter has his morning rise at 18 Pisces, and this just means that Jupiter emerges from under the beams of the sun as a morning star, which Jupiter likes to be. He likes to walk in front of the sun. It's a powerful moment for any planet, and it's called phasis, P-H-A-S-I-S, in Greek, meaning an appearance. It's an opportunity for those treaties and peace agreements that may have occurred during Sun conjunct Jupiter to make their debut and be tested out in the world. That very same day, Mars moves into the orb of conjunction with Saturn, and it perfects April 4th, but already it makes its presence felt. The good news is that Venus is chaperoning Mars through his journey in Aquarius, moderating that impact to some extent. The Mars-Saturn conjunction happens every 2 years, and since both planets are malefics, their conjunction tends to bring hardship according to the sign that it's in. Again, Aquarius ruling Russia and the former Soviet republics, the moderating influence of Venus is especially important as she passes through Aquarius, because left to their own devices in Aquarius, Mars and Saturn could create a really nasty and dangerous situation without much hope of resolution. Now, they may still create problems. I don't want to completely negate that, but I'm hoping that Venus will temper their malice and leave a door open to some kind of positive resolution to this very difficult situation. Now, the 4th week of March, March 20th, we get Mercury conjoining Jupiter at 18 Pisces, and this is a real contrast against Mercury conjoining Saturn in Aquarius less than 3 weeks ago. Sometimes this combination brings earthquakes once the planets are in orb, even shipping disasters. Don't forget, it is in Pisces, which has a lot to do with the ocean. Now, in a day-to-day setting, this combination suggests an opportunity for young people, schools, students, and businesses to move past restrictions and constraints that they've been operating under. It's a very liberalizing combination in the broad sense of the word. Same day, March 20th, we get Sun entering Aries, which is the spring equinox and the Aries ingress. We'll do a separate video, of course, on this, but it's a remarkable chart this year, with Mercury conjoining Jupiter in Pisces and Venus besieged by Mars and Saturn in Aquarius. It's very dramatic. The Aries equinox, if you're not familiar with it, that chart forecasts mundane events for the next 12 months, and I think that this combination of aspects that we're seeing suggests an important and eventful year. Now, again, the very same day, Venus will reach her maximum morning elongation at 13 Aquarius. If you're not familiar, know that Venus can never be more than 47 degrees away from the sun. It's kind of like she's a dog on a leash that's being walked by its owner, the sun. Now here, because she's at her maximum elongation, Venus is at her most independent and assertive self. She's also a morning star, which is particularly interesting because she's actually in a very difficult situation right now, given that she is besieged between Mars and Saturn. So I think it's a good metaphor for our current geopolitical situation. Now, just 2 days later, March 22nd, Mars will square Uranus at 12 Aquarius and 12 Taurus. Last time this aspect happened was April 7th, 2020, when COVID cases were rapidly climbing worldwide. There was certainly a general sense of panic and volatility in the financial markets, including oil particularly. Don't forget that Uranus is in Taurus, an earth sign, having to do with all of those things that come from underground, including oil. Now, March 24th, Mercury has his morning set at 25 Pisces, and he's going to be in the sun's beams until April 10th, so approximately 2 weeks. So matters concerning, business, schools, kids, students, all go kind of quiet or at least discreet, under the radar, if you will, and there could be an important announcement or development in these areas around April 10th when Mercury makes his morning rise in Aries. Certainly this is going to be a period of discretion and of keeping things under wraps, and this is probably good advice on the personal level as well. Spend these 2 weeks, working on your plan rather than necessarily announcing it to the world. March 27th, Mercury will enter Aries. Now, Mercury becomes a lot more warlike, a lot more energetic, a lot more overt and aggressive than when he was in Pisces. The atmosphere becomes more confrontational, but also we see more on the surface. Mercury in Pisces is something that just happens very quiet, very, again, under wraps. Previously hidden matters, as he enters Aries, will now become more evident. Now, the partial last week, the 5th week of March, March 28th, will have Venus conjoining Saturn at 21 Aquarius, and this marks the end of Venus's besiegement by Mars and Saturn. So we could feel a sense of relief immediately following this conjunction after a very tense month, as Venus sort of is poised between these two evils, between Scylla and Charybdis, to use an ancient Greek metaphor. So I think there is a sense, on the one hand, Venus conjoining Saturn, sometimes there can be sad news involving women. There can be something kind of serious or weighty involving the arts, of course, because that's Venus as well. But again, as Venus leaves that Saturn conjunction after March 28th, there is a real sense of, okay, maybe now things get a little bit of a chance to relax. Now, we do get another new moon this month as well, March 31st. It's a new moon at 11 Aries. This lunation conjoins Mercury, who is not afraid to state his demands. The lunation is ruled by Mars, who is hemmed in by his conjunction with Saturn. It's good in that Mars is somewhat restrained from acting, but Saturn can bring a certain ugliness to the situation. This will mostly manifest in April, since lunations have that 2-week period of effectiveness. There could be a coda, some kind of little ending or some kind of something involving that Russia-Ukraine conflict at the moment. In one sense, we could see this as a dangerous moment, right? When Mars is highlighted and therefore it's easy to get into a conflict-ridden situation the next 2 weeks. On the other hand, Venus, even though she is no longer between Mars and Saturn, she's still well within orb of a conjunction of both of them, and so she is still maintaining her peaceful influence. I think the real test of the peace will happen when Venus leaves Mars and Saturn when she enters Pisces in early April. All right, so March is obviously a lot more eventful than February and January, and I think there's a bit of a whiplash effect. We start out with about a month of Jupiter's influence through those lunations, through the Sun conjoining Jupiter, and also Venus being present with Mars and Saturn. So even though things are difficult, there's a surprising amount of goodwill and good feelings. The last week of the month, I think, is more volatile and ushers in April, which is going to be one of the most active, but also in some ways one of the most hopeful months of the year. I hope you enjoyed this forecast, and if you did, I invite you to subscribe to the Nina Griffin channel on YouTube if you would like to get notified of new videos as they get made public. Thanks for watching.